though. Very good day to you. High pressure's been nearby through recent days and it's going to cling on for a little while yet, but exactly how long it lasts for and what happens thereafter, that's where there's some uncertainty through the next 10 days or so. Starting off looking at our multi-model regimes, and the oranges, the reds showing high pressure nearby being the most likely setup, which is what we have at the moment, and it's what we'll continue to have as we go through, well, much of the weekend into the beginning of next week. And it's around this time next week when we'll end up with a sort of battleground between high pressure being nearby, and exactly where that high pressure is going to be will be pivotal to the weather that we're going to see. And also the potential for something a little bit more changeable, a bit more mobile coming in from the west. You can see that with the blue colours developing as we go through the latter part of next week. But let's start off and look at the bigger picture that we have at the moment. And we actually have a bit of a blocking pattern, high pressure to the south of the UK. And with that, the jet has been tumbling over to the north of the UK, and with that taking most of any frontal systems with it. And so for many, it's been largely dry, and that's the theme that we'll continue with as we go through the rest of Wednesday and overnight into Thursday. Lots of fine settled weather. With high pressure though, we do often have some murky conditions, some poor visibility. So there will be some fog first thing on Thursday morning, particularly around parts of the North Midlands into Lincolnshire, Yorkshire perhaps. A bit of fog here and a chilly start. Otherwise, some thick cloud, could be a bit murky because of this towards the southeast. And actually as we go through the day, we're going to see that thick cloud towards the southeast edging just a little bit further northwards at times. Nonetheless, some parts of northern England, North Wales having some decent sunny weather, even some bright skies across eastern parts of Scotland, and those temperatures did just pop up. It is going to be a little bit cooler, a little bit chillier than on Wednesday for many of us, but still about average or a little bit above across many northern parts. There is some wet weather towards the northwest on Thursday. It's coming and going, but it's looking largely dry through the bulk of the day. But if we look further ahead then, and as we head towards Friday, and there are a couple of things. Yes, there's a frontal system trying to push its way in from the northwest, the jet not too far away. Fairly tightly packed isobars here showing that there will be some blustery winds towards the northwest as well. But it's also this high pressure that has been dominating our weather across the south, shifting a little bit further eastwards, and it's this development towards the east. It's slow progress shifting towards the east because we have a blocking pattern at the moment, but nonetheless, as it goes, we will have a bit more of a southerly continental flow pushing its way across the country, and that means we're going to see that cloud that I mentioned pushing its way further north, and some cooler air pushing its way further north as well as we go through Friday as well. So Friday's looking a bit chillier too. As we go into the weekend and we stick with the influence of this high pressure, so many places staying largely settled, but we do start to see some fronts trying again to come over across a northwestern part. So winds towards the northwest, that's where you have a greater chance of seeing some wetter and windier weather, but nonetheless most places staying largely fine. Worth bearing in mind, actually going back to this system on both Friday and perhaps into Saturday as well, there is a bit of uncertainty as to the position that this will be in. Model runs from 24 hours ago had a bit more wet and windy weather across northern parts through Friday, but currently it looks like we're going to avoid the worst of that. I'll show that in a bit more detail in a second. To understand what's going to happen further on as we go deeper into the medium range, and well, we have to look further afield to the other side of the Atlantic. Currently there's some pretty cold air, a cold plunge of air, and that's important because it's actually going to strengthen the jet stream over the Atlantic, and it's this strengthening of the jet stream that's going to play a pivotal role in how our weather's going to play out through the next week or so. A couple of things. So that strengthening jet will bring a bit of mobility. I mentioned we have a blocking pattern, so you'd expect things to be quite stagnant, quite static. But because of this strengthening jet, there will be a bit of mobility. So we will see some progression. And with that, as we go through Saturday into Sunday, on this polar jet, we are going to see an area of low pressure developing. And this low is going to bring some warmer air with it. And then that's going to drive the jet stream, which is going to strengthen. But you can notice the strengthening side of the jet stream will be over this ridge, so on the eastern side of this ridge, and as a result, because of the fact that the jet is strengthening here, it's going to sort of break down and shift away this high pressure that's been dominating our weather through much of this week. And so we are going to see a breakdown of this blocking pattern, and then we'll see something a bit more mobile. The other thing to bear in mind with this strengthening jet out in the Atlantic is there are two areas of low pressure developing, or one a bit further north in the polar jet and one a bit further south in that subtropical jet. And in between, we have this ridge of high pressure that's building, and it's this ridge that could be pretty impactful in terms of the weather that we get next week. So I'll talk about that more in a second. But nonetheless, these two areas of low pressure, they will play a bit of a role in the weather that we'll get early next week. Let's look at things in a little bit more detail, starting off on Friday. And I mentioned there's some uncertainty as to how much wet and windy weather we get towards the northwest. But I think it's worth bearing in mind across northwestern parts there could be gales. At one point, models were suggesting stronger winds than that, 60 to 70. Not out of the question, but I think it's unlikely, 60 to 70 miles per hour, I mean. I think most likely gales in exposed spots towards the northwest and a bit of rain. For most, though, it's looking pretty cloudy, increasingly cloudy with that southerly flow, that continental air, that cold continental air coming in. And so we're going to see increasing amounts of cloud for many of us and temperatures on the low side, especially across central southern parts of the UK, Scotland, Northern Ireland, clinging on to something a bit milder. Temperatures here a fair bit above average for the time of year. Looking ahead to Saturday then, and we can still see those fronts, the frontal system towards the northwest, not really making much of an influence on the UK. It looks like here it will actually be largely dry. There will be some brighter skies around, the cloud breaking up a little bit compared to Friday. But nonetheless, we still then have that cooler, that colder air becoming a bit more widespread as we go through the weekend. So temperatures for many actually look even lower than on Friday, and the cooler, colder air will have spread further north. So across Scotland, those temperatures will be lower. Worth bearing in mind, though, perhaps over some higher ground, temperatures won't be particularly low. They could actually be a little bit above average over the higher ground. But for many, we're under the influence of that colder air that's coming in from the south. Then as we go through Sunday, and we have a weather front that's likely to push its way in from the west. Not too confident on the timing of this. It could be a bit quicker than coming through it. So it could be by the time we get to the middle of the afternoon, it could be pushing across more parts of England and Wales. And so we are likely to see some rain. It doesn't look especially heavy, but nonetheless a bit of rain. Ahead of it, a mixture of clouds, some brighter breaks, most likely towards the north, but not too unsettled even when this frontal system makes its way through. But into the beginning of next week, and eventually the front is likely to push its way from west to east. A front could be lying across southern parts on Monday, or we're likely to see more the influence of low pressure towards the north. I highlighted that earlier, so that's that more northern low that's likely to come across somewhere towards the north. And you can still see that the jet stream is running somewhere near towards the north of the UK, but many places starting to be again under the influence of a ridge of high pressure. Worth bearing in mind that that other low that I highlighted earlier, not too far away, likely to stay to the south of us, but we could see some influence from that as we go through the beginning part of next week. I wanted to show you this because this is our confidence index, and if you've seen this before, you'll no doubt know that greens are higher than average confidence for this stage in the forecast. And so through the next couple of days, the rest of this week, confidence is a little bit higher than average. Then it really goes quite low. And as we head through the beginning part of next week, confidence is a fair bit lower than average. That's not to say we don't know what's going to happen. That just suggests, in line with what I just highlighted, the exact positions of those individual low pressures and where any ridge of high pressure builds, that's where the uncertainty is. There are a few things that we can be fairly confident about for the beginning part of next week. So the wettest weather most likely to be towards the northwest. It's possible we could see some rain in the far south as well, but in the northwest more likely, but not out of the question of further south. I think for many, it's actually going to be a largely dry start to the week. So they're the things that we can be a little bit more confident on. The exact detail, the exact position of those lows, that's less certain, and that's why that confidence index charts paints perhaps a pessimistic picture on how we're thinking things might play out. But what happens thereafter? Well, this is the 10-day trend, and you may have read some headlines, some stories talking about some easterly air coming in. And as you may know, at this time of year, an easterly could bring something very cold, something very wintry. We could get some significant snow if that came off. It's not the most likely setup. I think as we go towards the end of next week, Yes, we have that ridge of high pressure building that I mentioned coming through. That's likely to push through, and it should push through quite quickly. And so really the influence on the UK, it's not going to be that much. We have a drier spell for a time, and then it shifts away towards the northeast, towards Scandinavia and beyond. And because it moves through relatively quickly, we wouldn't really see much of an easterly developing. Instead, we have low pressure, not too far away, not necessarily especially deep, but low pressure nearby, and so we get a west-southwesterly, quite a mobile pattern, wet and windy weather at times coming in from the west. This is the most likely scenario for the latter part of next week. The less preferred, but not out of the question possible scenario, is for high pressure to be somewhere a little bit nearer, so over Scandinavia, so it doesn't push through quite as quickly and it lingers somewhere towards the northeast of the UK. Now, if this comes off, as you can see, we could end up with an easterly wind across the UK, an east or southeasterly, and like I say, at this time of year, that's a cold direction. So we could see our temperatures dropping. And if this continues for a while, if it does happen, like I said, it's not the most likely outcome, but if it does happen, it will take a little while for us to see any significant impacts from it, really. It will be more so end of next week and the following weekend, so the 25th, 26th, that's when we'd start to see the influence of an easterly really kicking in. But if it did, then yes, we could have some snow showers coming in from the east and some colder air. So it's definitely one to keep on top of. Not the most favourable scenario, like I said. I think most likely we have low pressure towards the northwest of us, bringing something more akin to what we're used to, but it's just not out of the question at the moment that we could see an easterly developing as we go through, more the next 11 to 12 days or so. The other thing that I wanted to leave you with are the meteograms looking at temperature from ECMWF, and here are our capital cities, and they paint a couple of interesting things. Starting off in the north, and if we look at both Belfast and Edinburgh, for example, and at the moment temperatures well above average for the time of year, and actually towards the northwest, so across Belfast, they're staying above average and staying on the mild side really through the whole of the next 2 weeks. Edinburgh, however, likely, it's above average for the time being at the moment, but as I mentioned, through this weekend, Saturday, Sunday, we had that colder air coming up from the south, so some hints that could reach northern parts, so a slight blip or a slight dip in temperatures as we go through this weekend before picking up again, and then it's likely to be on the perhaps milder side, if anything. And then looking at Cardiff and London, especially this is more pronounced towards the southeast, so London really likely to see that colder air coming in, that continental air coming in as we go through this coming weekend, and so temperatures dropping below average for the time of year, and then picking up a little bit, but notice quite a large spread, as you would expect really, as we go towards the end of next week, and that goes in line with the idea that we could either have that low pressure nearby and something a bit more unsettled, or if that high pressure clings on and sticks to the northeast of us, then there is the potential for an easterly wind to develop. That's everything that I wanted to cover today. I hope you enjoyed it. I hope it made some sense. I hope it is a little bit useful to you as well. We will, of course, be keeping you up to date with the forecast, and you can find us across social media if you want to know more about the potential for an easterly. Bye-bye.